Good afternoon. My name is Jon Woodroof. I'm an American, actually from Amsterdam, and I wanted to start by thanking Rockit the opportunity to present today. And I also wanted to start with a question. Who here thinks that they're in sales within their company? Okay. Who thinks they do sales in general, otherwise? Okay. That's almost everyone. That's obviously what I'm trying to get at. And I was going to give a shout out to Peter from the presentation earlier when he said to sell is human, and reminded me of Daniel Pink's book with that title. And that's kind of my intention today. It's not necessarily just for salespeople, and I think entrepreneurs sometimes forget about that. They actually, although they built something amazing, they actually need to bring it home and close the deal and generate revenue. And that's probably a good intro into a little bit more about myself, why I'm here. Starting on the cycling corner, this is my company in the middle, two-tone Amsterdam. You'll notice a little bicycle there. Kind of entrepreneurially, if that's a word, where I got my start was running a bike shop in Atlanta. I'm also pretty excited about how many people from Atlanta are here. Shout out to Neba Web. And where it overlaps with the tech and startup scene is also in Atlanta. I started working for a Ruby on Rails company, and that's where I first got my exposure to building apps, back-end development, learning like the full stack, and selling consultative app development services, where I was able to help grow a company from 11 people to almost 30, joining a merger. The merger brought me over to Amsterdam. That's kind of how I ended up there. And the workshop and events can be anything, like it says there, from rides, demos, activations. What that means is anything from throwing races to a speaker series like Sales Hacker Amsterdam that I host there. And then the overlap example with cycling industry and the tech scene is a early morning ride that I do in Amsterdam called Roll Call. And actually rode this morning around Chisinau with a guy here locally, and rode 50 kilometers this morning before the conference. So diving right in, for the people that raised their hands that said they do sales for their organization, how many of you know your ideal customer profile? Ooh, way less hands. This is good. Okay, so obviously you're trying to sell to someone, and typically the answer that I'll get for the kind of work that I do, helping startups do sales, whether it's one-to-one consulting or lead generation, is they say they could sell to anyone, which, yeah, that's not the case. They're thinking about, yeah, and perhaps rightfully so, some of the things we saw earlier today, like how are we going to scale user acquisition, how are we going to do social media, this kind of things, like what are the tactics. But that isn't where you should start. You should start by drilling down to who you're actually selling to, because it isn't everyone. It's specific people. Like when I did sales for a Dutch startup for enterprise HR software, it was specifically younger HR professionals that were maybe new at that organization, and a relatively large organization, that wanted to make a name for themselves professionally. If someone had the same job for 10 or 15 years, why would they want new and innovative software? So why would I even try selling to them? So I really had to drill down who we were selling to, and don't take that as like a gut instinct kind of thing, because it needs to be based on data, and that's kind of something that everyone keeps repeating all the time in any speech that I've heard so far at this conference, is basing decisions on data. And one example is a guy, George Soto, he used to be a part of a company called MoPub that was acquired by Twitter, and MoPub was for mobile publishing, and they were shooting for the big fish. They wanted to close the deal with the biggest companies. And the biggest companies didn't care because they already had those tools in place internally. But when they started to look who was actually on the website and who they were actually closing deals with, it was the smaller companies, the medium-sized companies, and they were trying to get the most revenue with the big guys, and the big guys didn't care. So really take a look at who's actually interested or even visiting your site, or that you're having the best conversations with. So you really need to kind of break that down characteristically, demographically. You need to get to understand that it's not just a certain vertical or industry, region. It kind of needs to add up, and you really need to zero in on particularly who that person is. There's a bit.ly link there where I can give you to a worksheet where I can break down some useful tools where you can kind of zero in on who that person should be specifically. So this came up in the last two presentations, I feel like, in a certain way, where when you're talking about what you're selling, whether it's a product or service, it shouldn't be about the number of widgets and buttons and features, and it synchronizes with this, and then it sends this thing, and like all the extra bells and whistles. Nobody really cares unless they have a headache or a pain or something that you're solving. You need to kind of position the whole value proposition of what you're doing about the pain that they have. And what I'll be talking about today is about leveraging tools to to optimize that process. But the starting point is focusing on, again, that ideal customer that has that pain that your product or service solves. So let's say you figured out who that person is, or at least you have an idea now, you want to test it. How many people have built lists of leads with LinkedIn? Who you want to sell to? Okay. Maybe there should be more hands. This is good. This is giving me more optimism. So if you're searching LinkedIn, and I'll give you some tricks later about how to get past having to pay for that, because I think that's not the best way to spend your money if you don't have that much money giving it to LinkedIn. There's two links there: LinkedIn Export Tool and Data Miner. LinkedIn Export Tool is offline. That one's easier, so definitely check that out. If you do a search on LinkedIn, it exports a CSV of those people. Now you've got a CSV, you can upload it into your CRM, but probably before you do that, you want the email addresses. In my experience, and I've stayed up all night finding emails. When I first got started, I did what I do for startups, for sales on my own for a year. And if I had to do a campaign or reach out to people and I didn't have their email addresses, I would find them manually. I won't dive into all of those tools. Travis Wright, that presented yesterday, he shared a ton of tools, and a lot of those are great for finding email addresses. But you can outsource this to other people that have more time, or maybe in another time zone. So when you send it in the evening, you wake up in the morning, your list is ready. How many people are using Gmail in their organization? Yeah, that's like the most hands yet. This is great. And by the way, I'm assuming that you're using Chrome. How many people are not using Chrome? There's like 1, 2, nice. Does anybody use these canned responses in Gmail? No? A few? 1 or 2? So I'm proud of my, like I said, I live in Amsterdam. My Gmail's all set up in Dutch, so I'm working on it. And the first line on the right says email for lauwe mensen, so email for lazy people. But in English, it's canned responses and not standard answers. But the idea is not be rewriting the same thing over and over again, which I think salespeople are doing. You're always pitching, you're always writing the same thing. You're going to make typos. You're wasting time. You should have these set up where you can just click what you're already sending. Things like your sales process. How many people have a B2B app where you're selling to other companies? So people are more B2C here, potentially. I think either way, but especially in B2B, if you're trying to close a deal with anyone, it should be clear that from the initial conversation to work actually starting, and these slides will be available later, I know that's a lot of text, you need to at least map that out for yourself, and maybe informally, verbally, share that with them. And in my experience, I would share this in an email, and if we had our first contact, that's done. Next step is for them to send us more information. Okay, that's done. Now the ball's in our court to send them a ballpark. And we know that we're going to send that on the 16th. And by doing what you say you're going to do, when you said you were going to do it, you're already establishing trust. If you can't send a proposal or follow up when you said you were going to follow up, if you can't do what you say you're going to do, then why would people think that your app or service is going to do what it says it's going to do? But sorting this out is probably one of the first places that I see startups fall down, is that they think that they've built something amazing and that people are just going to buy it, but they don't necessarily know the steps to actually onboarding them as a client. This helps even if you're reaching out to who you think your ideal customer is. There's a number of things that could be a red flag where they're not necessarily the best fit. It could be any number of questions. They should be qualitative. They should be open-ended, and never ask yes or no questions kind of ever, really, I think. Always ask open-ended questions, and based on those answers, tell us about your budget and timeline, how involved to be in the process. For us, if someone didn't want to be involved in the project, that was a red flag. They needed buy-in. They needed to have time to give us feedback. And if they didn't have that, that was a bad sign. For me, at least, I don't know how that is. I mean, it differs regionally. In the Netherlands, there's a lot more bartering or negotiating. In the US, like, we never really negotiate about our price. So this kind of varies, but at least to get a sense from people from budget, if you're able to say small, medium, or large size projects, typically we're doing medium projects. Let's say small is 1,000, medium is 5,000 or 10,000. If somebody sees small and they think that is too big, then you don't have to have more meetings. So at least getting a sense for where they are with budget is typically kind of tricky to talk about money. And this, for me, if I'm doing this verbally or in an email, it's an easy way to kind of get over that hurdle. So again, going back to doing what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it. And I know email is really ridiculous. People have so many emails. But even if you're just following up when you said you would and checking in or sending what you said you were going to send, more information or something like that, I use a tool called Write Inbox within Gmail. So if I say I'll check in 2 weeks, I say it there and then the email pops up in the top of my inbox in 2 weeks, and I make sure to reach back out to them. So Assistant.to, has anybody heard of this company before? This is awesome. So let me go back one more slide. So this pops up when you're in Gmail, and it syncs with your Google Calendar, and you can see when you're available. So let's say 11:30 on Tuesday. And then it populates into the email, and there's 2 clickable times there. Sometimes people will reply, and they'll just say, okay, Tuesday at 11:30. But if you click it, or if they click it, it sends them an invitation and you an invitation, so it's immediately on your agenda. But the hack here is that link where it says, view in your time zone. Like if I have a call with someone in Australia, I have no idea what time it is there. Or I can grab that URL and I can actually put it in a tweet. So I can tweet at someone and say, hey, I'd love to meet at that conference or next week. And if they click that, it sends them to a URL that has those times. You can schedule it. So it makes it really easy for them. One that's a little bit more work on the prospect side. And this is if you have a lot of inbound leads or people want to meet you, maybe have a coffee. I'm always open to have coffee and talk to people. I always make time to do that. Sometimes people have to schedule something several weeks out, and that's okay, because once you schedule it, it's actually going to happen. And Calendly is a startup also from Atlanta that makes it super easy. And it also syncs with your calendar, and it'll say, okay, on Tuesday and Wednesday, I have some times available, and people can just book it there. They put their email address in, put their phone number. Super easy. QuickMail. How many people here have heard of QuickMail? Nice. Okay, so this also syncs with your Gmail. You fill out several templates. You have that list that we mentioned before. You know what your ideal customer is suffering from. You know their pain points, and you're going to write some personable emails. You have the template set up where it fills in their name, maybe some keyword that they've actually used to describe their job function on their LinkedIn profile. There's lots of things you can A/B test and see which emails are performing better. But this essentially, literally, automates your outbound outreach, and this is a tool that we use in the work that we do, connecting our clients with their prospective customers. What's cool about it is that if no one replies to the first or second email, which a lot of people don't, I'm guilty of that myself, by the third time they'll say, oh, I'm busy, I'm sorry, I didn't get back to you, this isn't for me, or you should speak to my colleague, or something like that. This is where, touch point wise, for sales, it's typically around 8 touch points, whether it's a tweet or an email or a phone call. Most people send 1 to 2 emails, and it's not going to work, and this takes all the hard work out of it. Using the LinkedIn example again, I think this is really helpful in pretty much any region except for Germany, maybe where people use Zing. When I hear a name or I see a name, in this case it was a journalist I was trying to get a meeting with, I didn't know enough about him yet, but I wanted to look it up very quickly. SalesLoft Prospector, another shout out to another Atlanta company. I have that Chrome plugin installed, I can highlight the name, and I can find them on LinkedIn. Like I said, I went for a ride this morning. I'll do that in San Francisco or in London or other cities, Berlin when I'm there. People use an app called Strava. If I go for a ride and I see that people rode with me on Strava, I can highlight their name, search for it on LinkedIn, and then connect to the people I rode with that morning. There's a link to get it. It's actually a paid tool, ultimately, Prospector. May make sense for your company, but the LinkedIn search function is a free feature. Newsly, actually, Travis mentioned this the other day. For me, this is super useful because if someone in your LinkedIn network, and I think this even syncs with Facebook now, if someone in your network is mentioned in the news or their organization, Newsly sends you a notification, and it's a great opportunity to get a conversation started with that person. Reportive, how many people are using Reportive? Okay, well if you're using Gmail, which almost everyone was, you probably should install this. I'll go ahead and blow my cover, but for all of the speakers at this conference, they were on an email, and if I hovered over their email address, I could send them a LinkedIn invitation from Gmail and was able to reach out to all of the speakers before we landed here in Chisinau. Introductions. So let's say you're talking to who you thought was the right person, but you really should speak to that marketing manager. You should speak to someone else in the company, and you want them to connect you. Maybe it's someone you went to university with, and now they work at this company, and they said they'd connect you to the CEO. Often people are like, oh yeah, can you connect me? But like, how do you describe what they do? You can't do that as well as they can. So if you make a prefabricated, pre-written blurb that they can just copy and paste, it makes it really easy. So if you give that to that person, be like, if you were me, who at your organization would be best to speak with? Oh yeah, it'd probably be this guy. Sweet, can you introduce me? Boom. If you're making introductions for 2 people, let's say you met here at the conference, is another tool I found recently, Intro. and then makes a double opt-in introduction. So it automatically asks that person and that person if they'd like to be introduced, and then it does it, which is pretty cool. So with a lot of fast-moving teams, I found this out with my clients and also teams I've worked on. It's a living and breathing thing. Features are coming and going. There's a new integration or something's been deprecated, doesn't exist anymore. And what your company does best often changes a little bit. And even if it doesn't, having that consistent across the organization is super key. So if you're not working day to day with the developers or other people in the company, if it's written out what you do in like a tweetable format, a short format where someone can open the email and not have to scroll through the message to understand what the deal is, this is super useful. So if you haven't like distilled this down yet for your company, I think it'd be great because then people can describe what you do effectively and use the same words. So this works really well for conferences. In this case, the pressure was off for me a little bit. But in some cases where I've gone like doing sales and like pounding the pavement, going booth to booth to booth and trying to schedule as many meetings as I can, I would tweet something like this in advance where I'd use the hashtag of the conference and I'd link to Calendly that I showed you before, and there'd be an image with kind of the value proposition of what our company's app or service or product could do for them. So those tweets would show up with the hashtag, and if they clicked that link and what they read there was interesting, they could schedule the meeting. How many people have thought of using Instagram for sales outside of like content marketing, of course, which is marketing a product? Has anyone used it for sales? So this is a startup festival in Amsterdam, kind of similar. Ultimately, mentioning my clients, putting their name out there with the hashtags that it shows up. This got a number of retweets and likes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that awesome of a picture, but what's cool is this has become super mainstream, and there's screens here on the side. But when you're thinking about what you're sharing, make sure that you, just like with the elevator pitches, you make clear what you're doing so when people see that picture, they associate it with a brand or maybe even a call to action. So here's a really quick story. When I first moved to Amsterdam, there was a conference, FITC, like Future Innovation Technology and Cool Shit, I think actually. And this designer, Sarah Blake, with the Dia de los Muertos skulls, and she had designed these for a project with Scotch and Soda, which is a Dutch denim brand. And she was reaching out to the crowd like, hey, does anyone here know someone at Scotch and Soda? I had just moved to Amsterdam. I didn't know anyone. I knew 2 guys, though, again, through cycling, no surprise. And I knew they had some ties to the fashion industry, so I mentioned them in that if they knew someone and they tagged 2 designers, so I was able to take that URL of that Instagram picture, send it to her, and then introduce myself after her talk that I had connected her with 2 designers at Scotch and Soda. Another thing that I did recently at Eurobike, which is the biggest trade show for the cycling industry in Friedrichshafen in Germany, is anyone that was using the Eurobike tag, I used a tool called Instagress, and it would tell them to stop by the Wahoo Fitness booth at Eurobike, which was awesome because that was their first time having their own booth at that show, and people kept stopping by. And you see this guy, he's like, ooh, I might need a power trainer, that's one of their products. And that was automated. It was just telling them, hey, stop by this booth. Another thing that I've become I feel pretty strongly about nowadays is the power of newsletters. I feel like it's kind of like on a rise back, especially because how fleeting tweets and things are. So it's a way to stay top of mind, and if what you're writing and sharing is relevant, and people stay subscribed, if they're not, then they unsubscribe. For me, I'm writing about cycling, startups, sales. I'm doing this for 27 weeks now, and every week that I send it, I get some kind of feedback. People reply, say it's nice, they want to start a conversation, maybe something that I wrote, or they just retweet it and share it, and I get more subscribers. So taking the time to write a newsletter for yourself, for your own personal brand, or for your company, I think is great. I mean, it's almost like a blog post, but it goes straight into someone's inbox. CRM, again, Travis gave Nimble a shout out. I got to give Pipedrive a shout out as well. For us at our company, we use Nimble because of the social integration. I'm not that opinionated about what CRM necessarily, but I think every organization reaches a point where they need to have that hub. You can start with a spreadsheet, but ultimately that's your call. Email tracking, how many people track if people open or click an email when they're sending a sales email? Should be everyone. Tools like this, there are apps that block it, but in general, it gives you a little bit of insight if someone's even received it or clicked it. And if you see that it's been opened and clicked many, many times, maybe it's been forwarded within the organization. So this might be a little far off for some people. The idea, kind of going through all these steps, this is kind of the home stretch here about down the road if you want to hire someone. for me, it's something that you've already done yourself. Like if an entrepreneur hires us to help them, they should have already been closing deals themselves. So they should have an understanding what needs to be done from, how are you pitching the product, what services or details or perks or things, what is the app or service bringing to the table? And when they're thinking about who to hire, they're often struggling with who is this person and how could they be like me or not like me? And they're wondering if it needs to be someone that's just junior or what have you. In this case, I've broken it down, and I'm breaking the rule from Mark's presentation where there's four bullet points. But it doesn't necessarily need to be someone that's super young. One thing that might be surprising, if you think about someone that's in customer service, they're obviously going to be able to relate to people and have some kind of sympathy and empathy that can relate to customers. But also from a financial services background, it's something that it was a challenge for me to be process-driven. That comes a little more naturally to them. So if you have a good sales process established that you've already done yourself, these people can follow those steps. So you don't necessarily have to be like the cheesy classic sales guy. And ultimately, if you have an understanding and a feeling from the interview process that they're coachable, then even if those things don't apply, then they can respond to feedback and continue to up their game. So this is also kind of counterintuitive, but I think this is good advice. It's something that I've taken on. Like if I'm talking to someone and their goal is within a few years to start their own company, they're going to have a lot of hustle. They see everything as a learning opportunity, and they would really love to take what they're learning and ultimately go beyond that. So I think there's like some kind of honor something good about being able to offer that stepping stone to someone. And the idea that someone's going to stay at your company forever is pretty tough. I don't think that's realistic, but if you have someone that's really motivated and self-starting, this is a good indication. So when you're in the interview process and you're talking about people that maybe could help your company with sales, for me it's important that you're very honest about what you're trying to do with your company. And that gives them good perspective of what they're going to be able to contribute, what their part of that is, and how they're contributing to that success. Does this person look like someone that can move up within the organization? Have you talked to people that they worked for? Or what I really like is if a salesperson is able to use one of their former customers as a reference, someone they've sold to, and you're able to talk to them, like why did they choose to do business with that company working with that salesperson? Ultimately, it doesn't matter what industry they were in. It's just that they were closing deals of the same size that you're selling. So if your typical deal is like $20,000 or $2 million, if they've been able to close deals of that size, they should be able to do it. Going back to my point before about if you haven't been able to do it yourself, I mean, it's like someone opening a restaurant that can't cook, or someone opening a software company that can't write code or something like that. Like if you're hiring someone to sell your product and you're not good at doing it yourself, it's kind of a red flag. Another thing that kind of is a bad sign, and I see this all over, is like commission-only kind of things, just underpaying. It's kind of a race to the bottom. I mean, you get what you pay for, and if you're underpaying for sales, I mean, these are people that are going to be driving the revenue for your company. Ultimately, the commission-only stuff doesn't work out in my experience. Another thing that comes up, especially in this industry, is if you see they worked at some company that you know about, whether it's Facebook or whatever, some large organization, ooh, they work there, they have to be good. It's really easy to sit in at bigger organizations and not contribute, so don't get, enamored just because you see a big company name on their resume. And ultimately, it's people buy from people, to use a classic phrase. So if you can't see yourself buying from that person, that's already another red flag. So going back to the qualifying questions that we had for the sales process, you can use the same quantitative approach for interviewing, and I think this applies for any kind of position, but also for sales, because it is such a touchy-feely kind of personable, qualitative thing. Thank you. And doing something like this, where you're able to break it down by how they rank, then you can really compare apples to apples, and it really just helps you make an objective decision. The same with what people you want to focus your time on as far as new business opportunity and someone you want to bring into the team using an approach like this. I know that link is really long, but again, you'll get the deck, so there's a worksheet there. So this is super cheesy, but it's totally true. You just have to keep trying. And from the people I've met so far at this conference, people from here in Moldova, throughout the startup scene, internationally, I think this is something that comes naturally, but maybe not for sales, because people aren't as confident following up, being proactive, reaching out, following up again, trying to add value, sending something interesting, just continue, until it's clear that they don't want to do business with you. Maybe they were too busy, maybe you should continue to try, maybe it's someone else in the organization, but you just have to keep trying. I know that seems cheesy. So, thank you. The third, thank you. The last tip is, yeah, you saw my Twitter throughout the presentation, so if you have any question that you didn't see in the deck, feel free to just reach out to me and I'm happy to give any advice or feedback. So, thank you.